So today we're going to talk about something that I call a sales velocity killer. We've all heard this phrase right here. I need to talk to my spouse or I need to talk to my boss. And what I mean by a sales velocity killer is that there's two killers here. Let me go full screen so you guys can see this. So there's two killers when it comes to the velocity, right? In other words, the first one I could say is, and I handled this just in the last episode, which is let me think about it, right? Let me think about it. And again, I handle that velocity killer. By that I mean it slows down the sale. Because again, if we're not getting a decision, we're not advancing the sales cycle just gets longer. So that's a velocity killer. The one I want to handle today is if you're selling B2C, it's let me talk to my spouse. Again, delaying the actual sale. Or if you're B2B, it's let me speak to my boss or let me talk to somebody in the committee before I can get back to you, Victor, before I can make a commitment. So what do you do in this case? What do you do in the case where they're deferring to a higher authority or another authority? That's what it's called. You're deferring to a higher authority. If you're wanting to talk to your boss, you're deferring to another authority if you need to talk to your spouse. So this is a tough one. So how do we handle this? Let's get into it. Now, one of the things we have to do is when someone comes up with this excuses, we have to try to prevent it. So, for example, one of the things we want to do is, as good salespeople, we definitely want to try to get what? Both decision makers in the room, right? Or the decision makers in the room. Now, this is part of the qualifying when you're setting up the appointments, scheduling, for example, if it's B2C, we want to make sure that the couple is there, right? If you're having a B2B meeting, we want to make sure that all the decision makers are there. So again, you do this before you show up, okay? You try to corral them, but reality is reality. It doesn't always work that way. You know, we can try to convince people to have, both people there if you're doing B2C, or we can try to convince them to have all the decision makers there, but you know how it works. Somebody always doesn't show up. So then the question becomes, what happens? What do we do when we only have one person, when it comes to B2C, there to make a decision or talk to us, or we don't have all the decision makers in the room? Here's what I'm going to suggest. Now, this is interesting. Years ago, I saw this movie. I got to highlight this movie. This was a movie. Let me erase that right there. This is a movie called Harvey. By the way, hit me in the chat if you've ever watched this movie. It's 1950s. I mean, the movie's old, right? I watched this when I was a kid, right? And in the movie, Jimmy Stewart, that guy right there, the actor, throughout the movie, there's this 6-foot imaginary rabbit that only he can see, right? Bear with me. Hold on. I know you're saying, what does this have to do with sales? Wait. So throughout the movie, you just see him talking to this rabbit, and it looks a little crazy. And at the end, you actually see the rabbit, right? So the rabbit was always there, the 6-foot rabbit. What does this have to do with what we're talking about today? If we can't let's do a B2C example. You're going to a house, let's say you're selling a pool design, right? Or you're selling windows or any type of residential type of, product or service that you have to offer. And only one person is there, husband or wife, only one is there. What do you do? At this point, here's what I'd like you to do. And this is why I bring up the rabbit, right? Because what I want you to do is throughout the discovery, throughout the presentation, if you're doing software, throughout the demo, I want you to imagine that the spouse, if it's B2C, is right there, standing next to the other person. In other words, I want you to imagine that the other decision maker is there and talk to them as if the other decision maker is there. Let me go into some questions specifically. For example, somebody says, I got to speak to my wife. You got to ask questions like this. For example, you want to say something like, what are her must-haves? What are some of the things, you're talking to the husband now, you say, well, what are the things that you and your wife discuss that, she says, Victor, we must have these things. Or you say, what are some of the things your wife said, or when you discuss this, said, these are no-goes. I mean, don't want to do this, don't want to have this. Or how about this? What are his or her expectations? If it's a pool, what are the expectations? If it's a software, what are the expectations? And what you're trying to do is what you're mentally doing is you're bringing that other person into the conversation. You're bringing mentally the other person in the conversation. So as you're going through these questions, you're constantly pulling the person in the conversation. For example, so what would she think of this feature right here, right? Or how about this one? What budget did you both discuss or agree on? Now, what's important here is that you're listening. You're listening for responses. In other words, if we ask the first question, what are some of the must-haves or the no-goes? If, let's say in this case, the husband goes, well, she definitely wants this, she doesn't want that. They're on the same page, so you're really talking to both of them there. But if he says something like, well, we didn't really discuss it, I think she might like that. That's when you're in trouble, because they're not on the same page. So again, they didn't talk to each other. How about what are his or her expectations? If the person can't answer that, you got problems. But again, what you want to do is try to, detect whether they've had the conversation, whether there's some agreement. This will let you know if you need to reschedule the meeting or maybe try to, find a way to bring the person into conversation via phone call, whatever it may be, which is really hard to do. So in this case, again, by asking these questions, you're pulling the person mentally in, like right there, like the invisible rabbit, you're pulling them into the conversation. Let me give you another example. I think you might find this interesting. For example, how about this one? I need to talk, again, to my boss. Again, you're going to have something similar like what are the must-haves, the no-goes, what are the expectations, features, but maybe you want to say, like what budget did you discuss? Again, what conversations were you having? Okay, let me back up. I want to highlight something here. What you're listening for is, again, how much they're on the same page. If they're on the same page, fantastic. Then it's going forward. But let's say that none of this works, right? Even as much as you keep pulling the person into the conversation, the imaginary person into the conversation, at the end of the day, they're still going to say, you know what, Victor, I still need to talk to my spouse or I still need to talk to my boss. What do you do, right? Because at this point, it's like, okay, you've invested all this time. What do you do? Well, here's where I want to say, let's train your champion. Here's what I mean by this. Let's say I'm talking to the wife, right? She says, I need to talk to my husband before making a buying decision. Now, I first need to know if she's bought in, right? If it were her decision, what would she do? In other words, if the scenario is something like this, let's walk through it. Let me go full screen so you can see it. So you say something like, Jill, did we cover everything your spouse was looking for? Notice I keep bringing the husband into the conversation. Did we cover everything he was looking for, right? She might say something like, yeah, you did kind of. Victor, you did. I'll speak with her later, right? If you're talking to the husband, I'll speak with her later. Great. Now, again, the next step is then to find out, well, is this person buying in to what you sold? So what do you think she'll say? This is an important question. What do you think she'll say? A lot of salespeople just say, well, if it was your decision to make, what would you say? Not a bad question. But notice what I'm doing. I'm introducing the imaginary wife into the scenario. What do you think she would say? So you can do kind of a two-part question here. It's really powerful. You say, if it was your decision to make, what would that be? What would you say? And if the person says, you know what, Victor, if it was my decision, I love everything I'm hearing. The price is right. The features are exactly what we're looking for. If it was up to me, I would buy. Then the follow-up question is, so based on that, what do you think she would say? Now, she's going to say, well, I think she would be on the same page as me. And again, what you're listening for is tone, vocal variety, how they're saying it, how much confidence they're using in responding. For example, if someone says, if I ask, what do you think your wife would say? He says, well, if they start doing that, you got problems, right? But let's say it does go your way. He goes, no, I think, Victor, I think she's going to like what you showed me. Now, at this point, you have to train your champion. The husband has to go talk to the wife. So what you have to do is to make sure that the husband sells you without you being there. So in this case, for example, what we can do is something like this. You can ask this question. Again, we can play with this a little bit. Okay, so let's say Bill. So Bill, what are the top 3 things that really sold you on this product? What are the top 3 things that sold you on this product, right? So let's slow down. Bill, if this was your decision to make, what would you do? He said, Victor, if it was my decision, I'm in. What do you think your wife would say if she was here? He would say, Victor, I think she'd be it. I think she'd love this. Now, what I want to do is make sure that Bill is going to go to his wife with the right training. I say, Bill, what are the top 3 things that you saw or liked about our product that made you say, this is the right thing for us? What are the top 3 things? Now, if Bill can articulate those 3 things, your champion is trained. By the way, those 3 things should align with what you think are the 3 most important variables in the sales pitch. So for example, if there's 3 features for a pool that you really want to emphasize, right? You want to have Bill say those 3. Now, so Bill mimics or parrots to you, this, number 2, number 3, these are the top 3 things. You're like, yeah, great, perfect. Now at least you've done all you can to send Bill off, trained correctly, to repeat to his wife the top 3 reasons they would buy, right? Now, if Bill says 3 things that are not your top 3 things that you think are the major selling points of your product or service, you can say something like this. Bill says 1, 2, 3. Bill, I like all those 3, but to me, these are the top 3. The first one you mentioned is dead on. But I would say that these other 2, this and this, are also very important when you talk to your wife about this product. Would you agree? Bill says, yeah, you're right. And that's really all you can do at this point. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, you could just close the deal right there, try to pressure, get a commitment. Fine. If you can do that, you like pressuring people, again, that's always a very dangerous thing because buyers are smarter today. They have more options, and you may actually repel the buyer. So if someone says to you, I need to talk to my husband, I need to talk to my wife, again, find out if the decision was theirs, step 1. What would you do? Decision mine, Victor? I would decide yes. What do you think your wife would say if she had seen the same presentation and gone through the same features? What would she say? Victor, I think she would say the same thing. So, great, fantastic. So when you talk to your wife, what are the top 3 things you're going to highlight to really convince her that this is the right pool for you guys? And you're hoping to hear the top 3 things. So again, to summarize, it's hard to get all the decision makers in the room. And if you can't get them in the room, then we have to kind of have the imaginary rabbit approach where you constantly bring the other person into the conversation. So for example, now let's say you're doing a B2B example, right? Let's do a B2B example, right? You're selling software, right? Not all the decision makers are there. Maybe you're in the room, you're presenting to 4 or 5 people, but 2 major or key decision makers are not there. Key influencers are not there. So what you're going to do is you're going to present the software. Same thing, you're going to go through all the features, highlight everything they've asked for, what they want to look at, so forth and so on. As you move towards the end of the presentation, again, say something like this. Team, did we cover everything that you guys were looking for? Did I miss anything? And you can go around the table and do it that way, right? Or pull them into the conversation. Maybe they'll give you some questions or say, no, Victor, we got everything. And then you do the same thing here. Now, so you're going to take this back to your 2 decision makers as well. By the way, who here is going to talk to these 2 key decision makers who weren't here today? Somebody will eventually raise their hand, or everybody looks at somebody and that's the person. And so let's say that person is, I don't know, Joan, right? Joan's going to go back and talk to the other 2 decision makers. And then you say the same thing. Joan, if it was your decision, assuming that the 2 decision makers are not here, understand that. But if it was your decision to make today and you had the budget and everything fit, is this the product you're looking for? Does it line up with exactly what you're looking for? Joan may say, yeah, you know what, Victor, it is. I love the presentation, good product, so forth and so on. And then I could say, Joan, I said, when you go back to these 2 other influencers, what are the top 3 things you're going to say to them that is going to really sell this product? What are 3 top things you took away that said, yeah, this is the right product for us? And what you're waiting for is for Joan to actually, again, mimic or repeat those top 3 things. And if they're not aligned, again, insert them by saying, Joan, I agree with those, but I would also add these 2. These 2 are also very important. Joan says, got it. And again, that's all you can really do in that situation. Now, in a B2B scenario or B2C, what I'm going to try to do also, and I don't have it in the slides, but it's kind of common sense. We're going to try to set up a meeting right there and then for us to have another discussion. Again, depending on the situation, right? So anyway, that's all I wanted to cover on this Sales After Dark episode. This is a tough one. Like I said, there's 2 tough objections. One is the let me think about it. We covered that in the last Sales After Dark episode. And when all the decision makers are not in the same room, how do you handle that? And I believe, because I've done it myself, I always bring an imaginary person into the conversation as if they're already there. And you're going to notice something in the presentation. It actually goes quite smoothly. It goes better than expected. You're constantly bringing the other person. What do you think your wife would say about this? Did your husband say he would like something like this? Did he talk about this? Did he mention that? When you guys discussed this before you called me, were these the 2 or 3 things you talked about? And again, what you're trying to do is get a feel of how much they're talking to each other. And again, if you have a great connection, and they understand each other, you're going to be able to tell very quickly whether the deal is or. So anyway, keep this in mind. Leave me some feedback. Love to know what you think of this approach. If you have a better approach or a different approach, I'd love to hear that as well. On that note, let me end this right here, and thank you. I'll take some questions right now if you got it.